This is the third and final part of the reconstruction of the treacherous journey of the run-down Nigerian freighter, the Bulk Challenge. It is jam-packed with thousands of refugees running from the escalation of factional fighting in Liberia. After a brief stop at the Ivorian seaport of San Pedro for repair works, the ship is now headed to Ghana. Not only are the passengers at the mercy of the sea, they are also at the risk of dying from dehydration, starvation, and diseases. To make matters worse, it is not even certain if the Ghanaian government would allow the doomed passengers to disembark. At the end of part 2, a woman and her daughter had missed the ship when they drifted far into the town during the stopover in San Pedro. Unfortunately, the woman had left her frail elderly mother on board of the ship by herself to endure what lay ahead without family support. The ship set off from San Pedro with renewed hope, but it seemed as if something did not want them to reach their destination. Rumors had started to come through about an order issued by the Ghanaian authorities to not permit the ship in their ports. The Bulk Challenge was a full-blown humanitarian disaster waiting to explode. The Tampa Bay Times could not paint a more dismal picture. The rusting, decades-old steamer has almost no accommodations for passengers, and most of those aboard are crammed tightly together on the ship's deck and in its cargo spaces. Food and potable water are scarce, and many of those aboard are suffering from dysentery, pneumonia, hunger, and thirst. Some have resorted to drinking seawater. Blue plastic sheeting has been drawn over some portions of the deck to protect the refugees from the sun and the periodic downpours of West Africa's rainy season. Phil Doherty, an official with the medical aid group Doctors Without Borders, said the vessel has only one toilet aboard, and people had been forced to defecate on deck. How does the math work with 4,000 persons using a single toilet? But from what later unfolded, it seemed like the toilet was the least of their problems. The rumored prohibition from the Ghanaian authorities was just one more impediment to their ill-fated trip. It seemed as if there were powers far greater than human authority opposing the movement of the Bulk Challenge. Except for the smoke over Monrovia waving them goodbye, when they left, the sky had mostly been clear. However, this was May. The rainy season in West Africa was gathering pace, so it wasn't too surprising when the moon and the stars suddenly disappeared from the sky one evening as giant pellets of rain pelted the passengers. Their struggle to overcome hunger pangs and thirst paled against the ferocity of the forces that nature unleashed against them that night. The ship rocked violently, tossing the passengers from one side of the deck to the other. In the face of this vicious assault from nature itself, the passengers had no choice but to unite as one. They shed their lack of trust in one another, transcended all artificial social stratifications to become one Liberian organism fighting against a common enemy. In a moment of reckoning, a Bassa man joined hands with a Mandingo man. A Mano man clung onto a Kran man to stay alive. The storm came like it had been waiting for this ship, not to stop it from going, but to remind those running from the war born of division that Liberia could not survive in disunity. In every cloud, they say, there is a silver lining. Though the rain was harsh, it was also a blessing in disguise. Rainwater was a safer choice compared to seawater, which some people had been forced to consume when their water supply got exhausted. It was hard for the refugees to keep a buoyant spirit when they were soaked wet with rainwater on a cold evening on a lonely sea, while their destination remained a matter of conjecture. Despite the gloomy mood, The journey of the bulk challenge continued quietly. There was a lot of soul-searching and worshipping going on. A 3-day journey easily became a 2 weeks nightmare, and it seemed like it would never end. As the ship lumbered through the waters, another night came and passed quietly. When morning came, hope beckoned once more. Takoradi, a large Ghanaian port city, could be seen on the horizon. As the ship maneuvered towards the port, 2 gunboats approached it. Many of the passengers may have thought that it was a welcome party, but it wasn't. The mission of the gunboats was soon disclosed. They ordered the ship to leave the Ghanaian territorial waters immediately. The captain obeyed and turned around into international waters to buy more time, knowing that there was a lot of international pressure bearing on the Ghanaian authorities. The next day, the same routine played out, with an ominous twist. The gunboats were sterner in their warning this time. They threatened to shoot the ship. They, in fact, shot some few rounds into the air to say that they meant business. The shooting did more than scare the ship off. It did not only shred the hope of the refuge seekers, it deepened the trauma they were desperate to escape. Many of them were already deeply traumatized, and some may have suffered from PTSD. They did not know what to think again. Nigeria seemed more like their next likely destination. But without food and water, would they survive to get there? As they hesitantly began to consider heading out to Nigeria, the ship experienced a generator malfunction. Luckily, the international pressure on the Ghanaian government had reached a feverish pitch. The UNHCR Commissioner, Sadako Ogata, lamented about the refugees at a Geneva conference. "They have been at sea for some days now," she said. "The situation has become desperate. Unless the door is open to them, a lot of people, many of them women and children, may die." She made a pledge to offer financial assistance to any country that may help. There was an apparent change of mind in Ghana. The gunboats followed the bulk challenge once again. The sense of dread was palpable. Was that the end for the passengers and crew? Have they come this far only to be blown out of the waters by their fellow West Africans? Hope had truly become hell. Or so it seemed. Fortunately, the gunboats did not return to kill them. They came to escort them back into the port. They gave a new command, but it took a while to sink in. They were granting permission to the beleaguered vessel to dock. Whatever transmuted those gunboats from foes to friends in such a short time must have been very powerful. So, having survived the drama on the high seas, on May 14th, 1996, the passengers on board the Bulk Challenge were allowed to disembark at the Takoradi port in western Ghana, where there was an array of international relief organizations waiting to receive them. From there, they were processed and taken to a place called Esipon, a nearby village, for temporary shelter. Sadly, not everyone who had started the journey in Monrovia made it out of the floating wreck that somehow became a savior of lives. Some travelers had remained in San Pedro, but some lost their lives on board the ship. Crammed in close quarters, some of the passengers had lived through the horror of a woman bleeding to death on the deck of the ship. As fellow passengers disembarked to a new beginning, her body was removed by health workers for a faceless burial somewhere in an unmarked grave. For those who survived, Esipon became their starting point to the future. Others would migrate to the more structured Buduburam camp, closer to Ghana capital, Accra. Here, some would marry and start their families. Some would return to Liberia a few months or years later and unfortunately be caught up in a new wave of violence when a rebranded Ulimo took Taylor's rule. Some would die and be buried here. Others would resettle to faraway countries like the United States of America, Canada, and Australia. Hope was reborn in the form of a baby who had been waiting patiently for landfall before coming into the world. A 21-year-old woman gave birth to a baby boy the very next day after she was admitted to Ghana. According to sources, with some 240 Nigerian passengers remaining on board, the Bulk Challenge continued its journey onward to Lagos. As the Bulk Challenge sailed away from the evening sunset, it was not the conclusion of the story of Liberia's boat people. It was the end of the first chapter in the narrative of the extreme suffering endured by some citizens of Liberia and other nationals trying to escape another upsurge of bloodshed in the country's prolonged civil war. Away to the far west of Ghana, in Sierra Leone, on the deck of the Dutch freighter, the Victory Reefer, another chapter of the drama was unfolding. The story of the Victory Reefer will soon follow in part 3 of our recreation of the story of Liberia's boat people. These stories must be told to remind ourselves that we are all custodians of our own destiny as a nation. If we don't play our individual roles to make it a peaceful, prosperous land, we will find ourselves, or our children, boarding the next ship to escape when unscrupulous men are allowed once again to set the country on fire. Kindly share the link, hit the subscribe button, and leave your comments to help us engage the subject better. Contributions from survivors of any of the 3 boats will greatly enrich the conversation. Copyright remains the property of copyrighted material, used knowingly or inadvertently to construct the narrative. The personal account of one of the survivors of the Bulk Challenge, Mr. Ezax Smith, provided valuable information about the ship's journey. The gripping account of his experience is presented in his book, The Bulk Challenge Experience. Reflecting on the horror of the storm that almost took their lives, Ezax Smith writes in his book, The Bulk Challenge Experience, My Personal Account. He says, "People were tossed from side to side and place to place, each holding on to the next to keep some balance and from falling overboard. It seemed that several forces of nature were acting against us: the wind, the waves, and the rain. It was a war of nature against man, at the detriment of man, and man without the ability to fight back or protect himself." From his horrific experience on the rusted ship, Mr. Smith has a lesson to share with Liberia and the world. He says, "This is a lesson we can all draw from. Whether in politics, civic, or religious situations, we can affect change for the good of all mankind when we, not if we, when we collaborate with all our efforts toward a common end. Our families can be stronger, our communities can benefit, and our world can be a better place."